So, as I say, we're here this afternoon to review the Chartered Manager process around applications in the fast track style. And we're joined by Karen from the CMI, who's going to run us through the process. I'm going to hand over to her to introduce herself and to kind of give you a brief outline of what we're going to cover this afternoon. Thanks, Karen.
Thank you, Helen. Hello, everybody. So I'm Karen Nichols. My job title is Chartered Programme Manager, but in essence, I manage the team that provides all of the service and all of the delivery that sits behind the Chartered Manager Award. So somewhere along the way, as you complete your applications and you come forward for Chartered Manager, I will see your application come through. My team will be handling it. But equally, if after today there are questions, I'm sure that Helen would identify, please reach out to her, but also please feel free to reach out to me or reach out to the Chartered team if there's anything you want to double check with us. So lovely to have you all here today. My understanding is, as a group, and indeed this recording for any future groups, you're here because you're completing a CMI qualification through the staff development programme with Huddersfield. And specifically, you are completing the CMI Level 7 Certificate in Strategic Management and Leadership. And that particular qualification, alongside some management experience, is going to make you eligible to come forward for what we're calling our fast track route to Chartered Manager. So what I want to do through the session today is talk a little bit about an overview of the process for that fast track route. I'll talk a little bit about the support that's available to you when you are completing your application. We look at the application itself, so I'll go through the questions, what you're being asked to provide, and give you a bit of an insight of what we're looking for. And I'll also talk about assessment, how that will work, and also assessment criteria. Absolutely, if you have questions as we go along the way, please do feel free to raise a hand, to post those. We can pick things up as we go along, but we'll also have time at the end to be able to answer any questions as a bit of a mop-up. So without further ado, let me move on slides. Let me talk a little bit about the process. So 4 relatively simple steps here. Start point, as I've already identified, is all about the staff development programme. So this is either that you have already completed that CMI Level 7 certificate, or you might still be completing it at the moment. And so for you, completion of that, being awarded that CMI qualification, if alongside that you have 3 years management experience, and that is the point at which you should be thinking about your chartered application and looking to come forward to us. The university obviously are sponsoring you through this, and from what I've understood from Helen, you're going to have a central folder where all the relevant information is saved and where you can access it. So that will include the application. There's also a bit of a support pack that sits alongside it, and again that will be made available to you. So your start point here as far as the process is concerned is completion of that CMI qualification. What we're then looking for you to do is to complete the fast track application itself. So going into that shared drive, that shared area, access that particular document. I'm going to go through that in a little bit more detail through this session today, but essentially that application is all about a summary of your leadership and management journey to date. It's about showcasing your successes. It's about understanding how you have developed your management and leadership skills, how you are applying those skills, and what you are realizing as a result for the university as a business. That's absolutely what's central to Chartered Manager, to the core of what we're looking to assess and to identify. So having drafted the application, you then submit it. I'm sure Helen will reiterate this later, but you're looking to submit this through Helen's team, so through the university, and then it's provided through to me at the CMI and to my team, and we will then move it forward into this assessment review stage. So for this, we are completing an assessment review of the written application that you have submitted. So we are purely focusing assessment on your written application. We are looking to understand, have the information you provided, does that meet the assessment criteria for award? One thing you will see as you complete your application is that we have included, if you like, the assessment criteria, the pass criteria are front and centre within the application itself. So it's quite clear to you what it is we're actually looking to understand and what we're looking to see in terms of the detail for you to provide through to us. But also within this assessment review, I would say if there are any gaps, if there's anything that we feel needs to be explored a little bit further, we would reach out to you, but that would be by email. So we'd be looking, if we need more information, we'll approach you for it. But if we don't, then from that assessment review, we will be looking to come up with an assessment decision. Are we awarding chartered manager? If we are, then that result will be confirmed through to you. We do have a moderation process, so we do sample assessments for moderation purposes, and it might be that your application is one that we select for sampling, but we would keep you informed of what's happening if that is the case. So ultimately, our aim is that you've provided all the information that we need, that we are able to identify you've met the criteria for chartered manager. We would finalise that into our systems and confirm your award through to you. So that's the basis, if you like, in a relatively simple linear process going on there. Let me move into a little bit more detail. So I just wanted to identify something around the CMI professional standard. So this essentially is a competency framework. So CMI have developed this in conjunction with key partners, individual members. This is all about looking to build an understanding of what characterises a good manager. And that's what this standard is focusing to. So as you can see here, there are some key areas. So 3, if you like, on the outer ring of the circle. So all about organisation performance, personal effectiveness, interpersonal excellence. But pinning all of those things together right in the centre is all about being an ethical and inclusive leader. Now, as far as the professional standard is concerned, this underpins pretty much any product that CMI looks to put forward or makes available. So for instance, any of our CMI qualifications will be mapped across to and be relevant directly to this standard. But it is also directly relevant, and in fact, it drives everything around assessment for chartered manager. So when I talk about assessment criteria, where they are identified within the application form, they have been taken directly from the professional standard. So you can see, and we understand also from CMI, how that professional standard is underpinning what we are looking for you to demonstrate, and what we identify as somebody who's showing the skills, the experience, the knowledge, behaviours, everything we would look for in order for chartered to be awarded. So professional standard underpins everything that we're doing. If I move on just to talk a little bit about support. So I've mentioned already there is an application support pack. When you look at the application itself, it's in 4 sections, and there are a series of questions for you to answer. There is some guidance provided. So for instance, it might give a steer on word count, but there could also be some guidance about the type of detail we're looking for within the application itself. But the support pack that sits alongside it is also looking to perhaps give some thought starters, some useful examples or ideas that might be your start point to think about what information you want to provide in response to each question. What you will see as we continue through, and the slides I'm going to show you when I start to talk about the individual questions, entirely up to you how you look to tackle the application itself. It's neatly divided into 4 sections. You might want to complete it in chunks. You might want to approach it by doing a section at a time. You might want to complete it, you know, in a linear fashion. So you might want to go through those questions or those sections 1 through 4. You might want to start partway through and then come back to the start. Entirely up to you how you approach that. But everything we're looking to provide you alongside is hoping to help you identify what's the right detail for you to provide, what kind of information could and should you include. So the support pack is absolutely there to help you. Alongside that, we also have our management diagnostic. And this has some absolute directly relevant elements that could be used in your application. So the diagnostic itself, it's available to anybody who is a member of CMI. So whether you're still on the qualification at the moment, or if you've completed the qualification and now you're part of the corporate membership through Huddersfield, you will have access to this diagnostic. It is not mandated for you to complete it, but I'd absolutely encourage you to, because it can be very useful when you come to looking at your application. So the diagnostic itself has been developed in line with the professional standard. It is essentially a self-assessment questionnaire. It is a series of statements that cover the different areas of the professional standard, you are prompted to grade yourself against each statement, 0 to 5, on how well you think you demonstrate or how you live that particular statement or skill. What we're recommending is when you come to complete the diagnostic, if you log into the CMI website, you'll see that the diagnostic link is there within the member resources. And when you go to the page, it tells you that there are 3 versions of the diagnostic. There is a junior manager, a middle manager, and a senior manager. And in this instance, we are looking for you to complete either the middle or the senior manager version of the diagnostic, whichever you feel is most relevant to the level of your role within the university. So as you go through the questionnaire itself, with each statement, there is an option to look at a tip. Now, if you click on the tip option, it flips what you see on screen. So from seeing the statement, you then get an expanded explanation. And what I would suggest is of value is if you look at those tips, if you look at that expanded explanation, have a think about what do you do? What is relevant from the way that you work, from perhaps particular projects or particular activities that you complete? How do they demonstrate that particular statement or that particular skill? And keep a note of that off to the side, because what you're going to find is when you come to look at your application, some of those things you've identified as examples against the diagnostic could well be directly relevant and a useful example to provide into your application itself. What you'll also get on completion of the diagnostic is a personalised learning plan. So based on how you have scored yourself against that series of statements, the learning plan will identify any areas that you've flagged as a particular strength, but it will also identify any areas if you've identified or scored slightly lower. And in that instance, they become opportunities for development. So what it will do as part of that personalised learning plan is provide you with some insight, with some links to resources that you could go to review, to use, to complete in order to complete a development activity in that particular area. Now, within the application, what we ask you to do is think about, in one section, actually the final section, is think about your CPD. What do you intend to learn or develop moving forward? So it could absolutely be that something you identify from this learning plan, you could lift, you could absolutely include in your application. So the diagnostic can help with the application itself when you come to completing it.
I think it's probably worth me mentioning at this point, Karen, just as a wee reminder for everybody. I'm sure this year's cohort are fully up for this because we are, as part of the second assignment is personal and professional development for strategic leaders. So one of the things that it's been suggested that they do is a CMI management diagnostic. So
Okay.
And obviously, as part of that assignment, they're putting together a development plan. So all of these things hopefully mesh like finely ordered gears in our CMI machine. That's my hope anyway.
Excellent, excellent. That's good to hear. Diagnostic absolutely is really useful. I mean, it's useful in general, but absolutely around the application form, it would make perfect sense to complete it because it could give some insight and some useful information to use. Let's move on. Let's talk about the actual application itself. So I've mentioned that it's comprised of 4 sections. Section 1 is all about you. It's a focus on the background to you, to your role, to your career story. Within the application, you'll see that the first area really talks about eligibility for fast track. And by that, what we mean is you will have needed to have completed a relevant CMI qualification. In this instance, that CMI Level 7 Certificate in Strategic Management and Leadership is the qualification that you would have completed. That's one of the eligible quals. And alongside that, we'd be looking for 3 years experience in a management role. We then move on to talk about this idea of your story. So here we're looking for an understanding about what your current role looks like, but we also give you the opportunity to look back up to 5 years and what your management and leadership journey has looked like across that 5-year period. Now, that might be that you've been with the university for the entirety of that time. That's fine. But if you have had other roles, perhaps with a different organisation even, if that's within the last 5 years, you have the opportunity to bring that into the mix. This is all about giving background. So I say be specific. It's about building a picture and giving further context to both your current and previous roles, but what your management and leadership responsibilities have actually looked like within those roles. So it's helping us understand a bit more about you and giving a bit more context to you as a manager and leader. You also have the opportunity in this section to introduce if there's any voluntary roles that you complete. So if you've got voluntary experience, if that focuses or includes you applying your management and leadership skills, you absolutely could look to bring that into your application. So I think about the types of examples where we've seen this happen already. We've had people come forward where they have perhaps been on a school board, a board of governors, for instance, might be one example. We've had people come through who recently, somebody who was an army reservist and wanted to be able to incorporate that. I'm sure we've also had scout leaders and various other coast guards, I think, have also come into the mix somewhere along the way. So absolutely, if there's voluntary roles that you're completing, if management and leadership is an aspect for you within that role, please feel free to also include that if this is giving us a view of you and background over the last 5 years. So that's section 1. Section 2 is all about who you are as a manager and as a leader. And the first question here that we ask is really around what chartered manager status means to you or will mean to you. What I've included on the slide here is also an example of what you would see in terms of pass criteria. So within the application, if you see something like this that's framed in a pink box that's in italics, this is identifying what is it that you need to provide in this section, what's being reviewed as part of the assessment. So in this instance, where we talk about what does chartered manager status mean to you, it's a short personal statement on why you want to apply, why now, but specifically to this pass criteria, we're asking you to explore and to think about, you know, if you become a chartered manager, what do you hope is going to happen for you in terms of perhaps it having an impact on you, on your role, or maybe on a team of people if they report into you, or the colleagues that work closely with you, but also across wider ripples across the organisation. And you'd need to cover each of these areas. The pass criteria here is identifying it's each of those 3 elements that you'd be looking to complete. So have a think about what that would mean for you. We also do understand that sometimes there are different drivers for somebody wanting to become chartered. Now, I know obviously completing the staff development programme, this is a natural step from that. But it might also be that it's a key point in your career. You know, sometimes we do get people coming forward where for them it's about professional recognition, but it might also be that there's been a particular project activity, something quite significant that's been delivered, and that is a really good example, and now is the right time for them to bring that forward. So a culmination, if you like, of project or a major initiative or something that they've delivered, and that's a driving force as well for them looking to come forward for chartered manager. So in this particular area, we want to understand what is your driver in that instance. Also in this section, as a separate question, we ask you to think about your role as an ethical and inclusive leader. Now, within this area, there are 3 key headings, as you can see on screen here: leading with integrity, championing inclusivity, which I really struggle to say, and committed to sustainability. There's a statement against each of these headings, and what I've shown on screen here is the statement that sits alongside leading with integrity. So this is about how you lead by example, how you hold yourself accountable, applying positive moral principles, building trust, demonstrating integrity in your actions and your behaviours. There's 2 things that we're asking you to do against each of these headings and each of these statements. First of all, we're asking you to grade yourself. Think about how confident are you in relation to this particular statement? How competent do you think you are in relation to this particular statement? Be honest, be self-aware as far as what you're providing through here. You might score yourself 5 out of 5. This might be something that's really a clear focus for you, a clear area of strength. It could be that you feel competent but not necessarily as confident about something. And this is not, it's not a trip, this is not trying to catch you out. It's about understanding, what does each of these statements, what does that look like for you in terms of confidence, in terms of competence? But perhaps more importantly, what we're then asking you to do is think about an example. Provide us with an example of how you demonstrate this particular statement through your work. So what you can see here on screen at the bottom right, I went away. This was a pre-submitted question. Somebody had asked, what could be used as an example against this particular area when thinking about how you might be an ethical and inclusive leader? So I went away and did a little bit of digging, a bit of a review of some of the applications that we've seen come through. I'm looking to pull some examples. Now, these aren't exhaustive, but here's some 3 things in this instance that I'd identified from applications we've seen in the recent past, so within the last couple of months, that have come forward. So the first example here was from somebody who'd identified that within their company, they were leading a project actually to embed a new company code of conduct. So it's something that hadn't existed before. They had responsibility, they were leading on the project to embed, to launch what this company code of conduct looked like, to ensure that they put everything in place for all of their colleagues to have an understanding. There was workshops and various other things that they had done to bring this about, but to ensure that everybody working for the organization understood what the code of conduct was, what the elements were within it, but also understood that they were accountable to it. So quite a wide-ranging project as far as that one example is concerned. Another example, and this was actually one from an educational perspective, so perhaps a bit more directly relevant to your environment. Somebody described how they'd set up a monthly course management meeting. So again, this was something that hadn't happened previously, but they'd identified it would be really useful to have a forum where they could have open and honest discussion. They could explore elements around teaching or learning, perhaps share best practice with each other. Also identify if there were any challenges that might be being felt across the management team. But also, and interestingly, I'm going to come on to this in a moment, they took this same example, this same piece of work, and used it against one of the other headings. They were talking about inclusivity. So actually, for them, it was also the management, the monthly management meetings were also about ensuring that coursework, that support materials and so on, that everything was accessible and accessible for all learners. So they were also making this regular meeting a way of ensuring that inclusivity was central to everything that they were doing. Another one here, again, from an educational background, somebody had identified that for them it was about understanding and acting on student feedback. So they were prompting their learners to provide them with feedback, but that perhaps it hadn't been as effectively used as it could have been in the past. So what they were looking to introduce was a way of ensuring that whatever feedback was provided, that it was reviewed, and any action that then was going to be taken would also be transparent. So taking on board feedback that's been given, but also ensuring that confirming, what action actually is happening on the back of that was fed back to those people who'd given the feedback in the first instance. So for them, it was about transparency and about ensuring that everybody was informed. So those are some examples as far as leading with integrity is concerned. If I just click onto my next slide, just a couple of examples around the championing inclusivity and committed to sustainability. So in terms of inclusivity, leading a project to achieve investors in people was an example that somebody had brought forward. And absolutely, inclusivity was a central theme within that. Somebody else had identified that they were looking to this driving an accreditation framework with a focus on inclusivity and access. So again, this was this same person using this same piece of work, not only to talk about being leading with integrity, but also about championing inclusivity. So making sure that everybody had fair and equal access to learning, to support, and to whatever they needed as a student within that particular educational environment. Somebody else came forward in terms of inclusivity to talk about how they were enabling flexible working, specifically to support childcare or carer needs. Again, something that had been identified as perhaps a gap or an area that wasn't as strong as it could or should be. And this was an initiative that they had led. And for them, inclusivity meant that you were able to provide the right level of support to colleagues, with whatever might be happening in their personal lives as well as within their work life. In terms of committed to sustainability, so a theme that has come through quite consistently, this idea of balancing the 3 Ps, so people, planet, profit, is something we've seen a number of times, and that people have identified. This is something they've looked at and given examples of what that actually means within their role, within their work. We've also had a number of people come forward who've looked at or identified that the UN Sustainable Development Goals, or the UN SDG, are something that as a business they're looking at, but for them specifically, there was a project, there was a piece of work that they were leading where they were using these UN goals in order to set policy, and ensuring that the policy was in line with this sustainability requirement, or this idea from the UN of what that could look like. So it was open, these were openly available, go away and Google them. This person obviously had found this, they'd looked at what are the different things that are identified here, where can I draw relevance from them, how can I embed them into the way that we work as a business. Final example here, a slightly different perspective. This was a candidate who was talking about how they needed to be sustainable in terms of selecting their suppliers. So for them, it did have an environmental lens. So they were looking at suppliers who were environmentally conscious in the way that they worked, in their own approach. But interestingly, sustainability for them also read back to, look, if they're looking at a supplier, they want to understand that that supplier also has inclusive practices. And in this instance, they talked about the living wage. So they wanted to work with people who were committed to ensuring that their own people, were also being well looked after. So it's, I guess, that balance between profit and people in this particular instance. So as I said, these are not exhaustive. These are some examples. I think for yourselves, this is really about being able to identify on a very broad basis, what your start point might be against each of these headings. Think about the different things that you might be involved in. Maybe they are initiatives, things that are happening within the university that either you are leading or that you're reading into, that you're part of a team who are delivering to one of these areas. Think broadly about what those examples could be and how you might identify them running into this particular section of the application. If we move on to section 3. So within the fast track application for Chartered Manager, this section is all about understanding how you have drawn on what you learned as part of that CMI qualification, of part of that level 7 certificate. And it's asking you to think about this in 3 ways. So there are 3 sections, or 3 headings, if you like, that fall into this particular area. So it's about a positive impact in terms of you having achieved the CMI qualification, of completing that. We want to understand the positive impact that that learning has had on you or your role. So this is specific to you and what you do. In this instance, so as we say here on screen, this might be about a particular model or a theme or a theory. Is there something from those modules that you completed, from that course of study, that really resonated with you? And explore that in a bit more detail. What did you learn from that particular topic or theme or module? How have you applied that learning? So how are the ripples able to move further beyond the qualification itself? And what has the outcome been? So it's a bit of an evaluation, I suppose, of what have you absolutely drawn? What specific, one particular element has really struck with you? And actually, that's something you're able to talk about in terms of it impacting you and your role. We then ask you, think about how has your learning helped you to build a high performing team or a high performance environment. So this might be about, if it's a team perspective, how has that learning helped you to create a sense of purpose within your team, for instance? What particular goals or objectives have you set for the team? What have you drawn from your learning to support that? How are you, or how have you measured or monitored progress against those objectives. So what you're trying to achieve with your team. And again, what was the outcome? So again, this is really about evaluation. And then the final area here is then about understanding the impact of your learning on the wider organization. So how has that helped you to achieve organization goals? So here it would be about identifying, what have you been trying to achieve in terms of organization goals? How does that fit to organization strategy? How did you achieve the results you've realized? What worked, what didn't? A bit of reflection here for that. What have you learned from that? What lessons maybe do you take away and do you apply in the future? And again, what was the overall outcome? So very much about front and center, you've completed your qualification. Let's understand how that has helped you as a manager, as a leader, thinking about your role, the team or the team environment, and the wider organization. The final, sorry, I should also say focus for this. So we're really looking for you to identify, if you talk about outcomes, identify outcomes that are focused in the last 18 months. So that's where the results have been realized within that timescale. You could think about, if you've got multiple examples, you might have lots of different things you could explore here. Think about what you're most proud of and perhaps use those. So you might start off with a long list, but let's get that down to a shortened list. I think within these areas, it's also important. It is absolutely about what you did, but it's also about why you chose a particular approach. And how has that impacted on outcomes? So we absolutely want to understand how skills are being applied in this particular instance, and those skills that you've developed from perhaps as a result of your qualification, how are those being applied? What's that realizing as a result for the business? So moving on to the final section of your application. For the fast track route to award, this is a focus on CPD. So you're asked here, it's a relatively simple table. You are asked about what are your upcoming goals? What is it you're intending to learn and develop? Over the next 12 months, we're talking about here. You're asked to think about what activities are you intending to complete, so in order to achieve those goals. So what are you planning in terms of actual deliverables to the goals themselves? And what will success look like? What are you hoping to achieve? What are you hoping the outcome is going to be? Now, I would suggest let's circle back to the diagnostic. So I mentioned in completing the diagnostic, you're getting that personalised learning plan. It is identifying support resources, identifying opportunities for you to go and do some development if you choose to. Now, you could absolutely lift some of what's provided in that learning plan and put it into your intended CPD activity for the next 12 months. It doesn't need to only focus on that area. You can draw from things more broadly. So for instance, if you have a performance review cycle within the organization, it might be that as part of that, you also look at learning and development. Absolutely think about how that might also feed into this CPD plan. It might again be that from the qualification itself, perhaps this particular area within the qualification, perhaps the area that resonated most with you, actually, is there further development? Are there other things that you would like to develop further or learn further as a result of having completed the qualification? Absolutely, you can look to bring that into your application. So here, what we're looking to understand is your commitment to CPD and what your intent is at the point that you're putting your application together, and how you'd be putting that forward. That's the sections of the application. I think, as I've perhaps already said, entirely up to you how you tackle this. So you might want to do this in one sitting. You might want to break it down into chunks. You might want to do it section by section. You might want to do it question by question. Entirely up to you. It's really about what works for you, where you find the time in order to be able to do this, but they are intended to flow, one from another. So these are interlinked. And we're obviously, with the support resources, looking to provide as much detail as we can to help you understand, what to put together and what to include in your application. So once you've completed it, as I talked through the process, you're sending that through to Helen's team. That's then being sent through to CMI for us to complete that assessment review. And once the assessment is done, and hopefully you've provided all the detail we need, we're able to confirm that yes, you've met the criteria for chartered manager. And if we're applying that to our records to show that now you hold that award and that you have CMI membership at a chartered grade, but it doesn't end there. So it ends in terms of the initial award of you achieving that chartered status. But for anybody who is a chartered manager, there are some requirements to retain your award. So first and foremost, you need to keep your CMI membership up to date. Now, for the majority, I think, of Huddersfield colleagues who've completed on the staff development programme, who've completed that CMI qualification, I think you're likely to be added to the corporate membership. So the Huddersfield, so the university would be ensuring that that's in place as long as you're still a member of staff, that your membership is being handled through the university itself. What we then ask you to do is to keep a log of your CPD. So this is the activity that you are completing on an ongoing basis. If we ask you to provide it through to us, then please do so. But beyond that, you do not need to send it through to CMI unsolicited. The way that we work with this, alongside keeping membership up to date, we have a CPD sampling process. So every year we will sample a random selection of people who hold the Chartered Manager Award. Anybody that's newly awarded, you will always have at least a 12-month grace period before you would ever fall into any sampling pot. So really it's about ensuring that, you know, you're not being awarded Chartered Manager one week and then next week you suddenly get a request through from us to provide a CPD record. You absolutely will have a cushion, this grace period, when that would not happen, and it will be at least 12 months. It's a bit like juror service. You might find that you're never selected. You might find that we quite like you and seem to come back to you on a semi-regular basis, but because it's random, that's absolutely, you know, just the nature of what could happen here. But keep a record of your CPD. And if we approach you and if we ask for it, then please provide it through to us. Useful here, I think, to also talk about what do we mean by CPD. So CMI, our focus, we don't talk about a set number of hours. So we're not looking about input or time that you put into your CPD. We focus on outputs. So what we want to understand is, what have you decided? What have you selected as activity that's all about consolidating or building on your continuous professional development? And actually, it can be pretty broad. We are not prescriptive about the type of activity that you might complete. If you can identify that a particular development activity, if that's helped you in terms of your management and leadership, developing your skills in those areas, it can be relevant for our purposes. So for instance, you know, on screen here, we're talking about your membership. It gives you access to a wide range of resources through Management Direct, you know, videos, articles, ebooks, and so on. So there's a wealth of resources that you could tap into, but it doesn't have to be only that you would use. If you look at the table on the right-hand side of the slide here, we've got different types of activity. So there could be something here that is about activity that is formal, that is structured in some way. You know, you might go on to complete another qualification. You might look to complete a development program that's not qualification specific. You might be looking to attend conferences or seminars or workshops in some way, something that is planned, something that is structured. But it's equally relevant for you to be able to identify that CPD could be unplanned. It could be relatively informal in nature. So, you know, something here identified, perhaps reading a particular article, that a bit of a light bulb. Actually, there's something that you're reading about here that you can take, that you can explore and think about how it might be relevant to what you do, and actually take some reference from that and apply it. And so CPD in that instance could be about you picking up on some bright ideas. Reading's one example. Networking, perhaps meeting with other people, again, having discussions. That might be with colleagues within the university. It could be with, you know, colleagues that or peers that also work in an academic environment, but not necessarily at Huddersfield specifically. So, you know, networking can absolutely be part of that. And anything at all that you can identify has helped you to develop your management and leadership skills could be used as part of your CPD record if we ask you to provide that through. That really only leaves me to kind of flag in terms of next steps. So absolutely, I've identified that the diagnostic tool, whilst not mandated, it absolutely can be useful to you when you're looking to come forward for Chartered Manager. So I encourage you to think about going and completing that. The university obviously is going to be supporting you and confirming, if you like, the point at which you can move forward with Chartered Manager. So if you've already completed your level 7 certificate, then absolutely that might be something you're looking at doing right now. If you're still studying at the moment, then it will be at the point that you complete. Please do also, any queries, obviously I've got opportunity for you to ask questions at this point, but any queries after this session, please do feel free to reach out, whether that's via Helen, whether that's coming direct to my team here at CMI. You've got our email address, our team email address here. If there's anything that you want to know, any specific question you want to ask, please feel free to reach out to us. And at that point, I'm going to, well, go quiet and let you have an opportunity to ask questions if you have any.
Thanks, Karen.
Right.
There's at least one person typing, so we'll give them
Oh.
a moment to finish. A couple of things from me. As Karen says, your completed application should come to the standard cmi@hud.ac.uk email address. You'll find all the resources, including Karen's super new updated support pack, is in the file section of Channel D in our team. There is also links to the writing workshops that we'll be running. So if you want to come and sit and Danny or I will be breathing over your shoulder and reading sections and giving you some feedback on that, we'll be doing it. Alison's, yes. So you mentioned about scoring. I don't know that the scoring section is included in the version of the fast track form that we have.
Do you know what? And that's a very interesting question. It might be that I have led you on completely down the garden path as far as that's concerned. Let me just, in fact, I'm going to quickly go and just look on my own drive. Let me see. I think you might well be
Thanks,
right. I think
Lindsay.
we might not need to score at all. Bear with me just 1 second.
Alison's on it today, as always.
No, you're quite right. You do not need to score. Ignore
No
me.
scores.
We make people who complete the full assessment route score themselves. So even less for you to do on that basis. It's all about example in that instance. My apologies for having identified something there that was not quite correct. But the good news is, yes, slightly less for you to do, but focusing on your examples as far as being an ethical and inclusive leader in that section.
Marvellous. And I think it's important today, isn't it? I mean, there's lots going on in the university at the moment that should give you particularly examples around looking after people's well-being and the sustainability piece. Definitely managing change and all of those things kind of create a lot of opportunities for that, as well as the kind of integrity question. So I think we should all have plenty to write about. I think there's another question coming, so we'll just give.
See somebody typing.
Yes. It's exciting. Any other questions that people have got? Now is the time before we round off today's session. We talked earlier, didn't we, Karen, about the kind of breadth of stuff that fits under the management heading as far as CMI are concerned. And we talked about that management is not just about line management. I know that for most of the people involved in the Level 7 programme, most of the people this year are line managers. But obviously, if you've got any concerns about that, we're more than happy to have a chat with you about how you fit under those things. Karen's just brought up the guidance.
Seamlessly, Helen, seamlessly. The document that we talked about earlier. So where we talk about management experience, in this particular instance, this is not specific in terms of an educational environment, but when we talk about somebody needing to have at least 3 years experience, management experience, we could be talking about managing people. So it could be about having line management responsibility, about setting objectives and targets, reviewing performance, supporting development, but it doesn't have to be. We absolutely get people who come forward for chartered manager who do not have a team that reports into them. We have some, you might say, unlucky individuals who have more than one line manager that they report into, but they don't have a team themselves. Or it could be that, you know, sometimes it's about working in, I feel like, a cross-functional team or cross-functional across the business. That can also happen. So it's not always about needing to directly manage people. It could be that you're involved in managing projects or operations in some way. So that could be, you know, design or planning for either a project basis or an operational view. It could be about implementing plans. It could be about monitoring project or operational deliverables or ongoing or continuous improvement. So it could absolutely be coming from a lens or a perspective that's far more about project or operations. Could be that you're involved in managing change or have been within, the last 3 years, that part of your role has encompassed that, whether that's about identifying change opportunities, whether that's about you being the person that's actually driving whatever change may need to look like, and how that flows through, how you manage that process, how you keep people informed, how you ensure that the change embeds successfully. So it could be about creating plans and activities. It could be about managing the implementation of change. It could be about looking at doing things, being innovative. I know that Helen and I were discussing earlier, this could be about, if you're in an environment where perhaps you have a whole series of activities that need to be completed, you maybe find yourself that you don't have as many people to complete them. Sometimes innovation is actually about needing to look at, do you know what, we still have all these streams of work, these areas that need to be completed. Maybe we have not as many people in to be able to do them. So actually, do we need to innovate? Do we need to look at how we do things? Do we need to look at perhaps streamlining or simplifying? These might be elements that have been part of what you've been actioning in that timeline. Could be about how you work with stakeholders, how you're monitoring or measuring, your outcomes, how you're monitoring and measuring the success of that change. Equally, you might be involved in managing finance or resources. It's not always just about the money. You might be a budget holder. You might be involved directly in business planning or things that need to read back to the bottom line for the university. So you might have responsibility around, budget monitoring or spend. But actually, it might also be about resource planning or deployment. It might be about how you're working with your own teams or with your colleagues, or how staff are being, deployed across the organisation. So when we talk about management experience, it can be any mix of these particular areas and the things that sit underneath them.
Thank you, Karen. I think probably there may be 1 or 2 people from this cohort who end up in the Chartered Fellow grade,
Okay.
but I'll share this document with people and so they can see the kind of things they might be referring to. I know that Angela's got to disappear, but I need to answer her question, then she can pick it up here. So yeah, you're correct that there is a bit of an overlap, but us in the kind of, you will be submitting your second level 7 assignment before you submit your chartered manager application, but there may be a bit of an overlap in the kind of administration of marking and the claims process, but Karen and I have been round this roundabout a few times before, so it is part of the process that we understand that you have in effect finished the qualification and will be picking it up. So anybody who gets an extension on the qualification will get an equivalent extension on their chartered manager application process, so we can follow that through and make sure you've got the additional time that you'll need to do the reflections on the application after you've finished your second assignment. Although having said that, the second assignment will helpfully help you with quite a lot of these areas. So I think you'll find that one naturally leads into the other. But yeah, we'll be looking after you and making sure you finish your level 7 qualification and therefore can become a chartered manager or even maybe chartered fellow. Any other final questions before we all finish off this afternoon? So it appears that we have finished people's filled people's brains with stuff. So people are voicing that appreciation in the chat. Thank you very much. And let me switch off the recording.